Welcome in today's episode of Planner Stories, the show where we invite inspiring planners to share their career path, their convictions, and their vision of planning. And today I'm really excited to welcome David Engwicht. David, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. A
Perfect.
little warm, but fantastic.
Where are you calling from?
Brisbane in Australia.
Oh, nice, nice. How is the weather there?
Over 30 degrees today.
Nice, nice.
Yes,
We're in New Zealand, and you know how New Zealand weather is. Like it changes a
yeah,
lot.
yeah,
Sometimes, like it's been raining like maybe 20 minutes ago, and now it's sunny, and probably will be raining again in 20 minutes.
yeah, yeah.
It's how it is.
Yep.
Nice. Well, maybe we can just start easy by you telling us who you are and what do you do today in the planning industry.
Okay, so I got my start in the industry in 1987. However long ago that is. um, and it started with the highway department deciding to widen a road through our community. And I was part of a community group set up to fight that proposal. I had no background in planning, traffic, urban design, any of those issues. Um, and as part of that campaign, I started talking to elderly people in my neighbourhood about the way our neighbourhood used to work before it was taken over by traffic. And that got me absolutely fascinated about how the design of space impacts on community life, neighbourhood life, social life, etc. Um, I dedicated 3 years to that fight, and as part of it, I wrote two little booklets as part of our campaign. One of those took off all over the world, and next thing I was traveling around the world as some kind of guru on urban planning and traffic management, etc. So, absolutely accidentally fell into it. Um, I think the interesting thing about that is I don't have any tertiary, in fact, I'm a high school dropout. And because I have no professional background, I had nothing to unlearn. And everything I learnt about the way cities work, neighborhoods work, etc., was through observation, hearing people's stories, etc. So I was very, very fortunate. For the next 15 years, I traveled around the world giving workshops for planning professionals, which meant that I got to see lots and lots of different places. I made a policy of always going somewhere exotic as part of those trips, and learning by going to those places. And then after 15 years, in which I would class myself as a theoretician, I had actually never built any of these any places. I decided I wanted to get my hands dirty, so I stopped traveling. I stopped doing those kind of workshops, and we started working on how do we actually transform real towns, real neighborhoods. And eventually, long story, but we eventually developed a product that we called the Seven-Day Makeover, where we were making over town centres in 7 days. And that required basically inventing a whole lot of new mechanisms in the way that you work with local government, because that sounds impossible, and it is under existing ways of doing things, but we invented whole new ways of working with those towns.
Awesome. I,
Yeah.
I don't, if you don't mind, Lucas, I'm quite interested in terms of like those early years. It sounds like you had like a very kind of practical way of building up what your knowledge base was. Like instead of going to a university, it sounds like you just learned it through conversations with people in your neighborhood. Is that kind of right?
Both. So, one of the things about the planning profession in general that I realized very quickly, and a little bit of background here. So, I was brought up in a fundamentalist Christian household. My dad was an itinerant gospel preacher. Um, and so, when I got involved with the planning professions, I suddenly realized that exactly the same fundamentalist structure is within the planning professionals as was within religion.
Yeah.
And, you know, not to pick on any one of them, but every one of them had their own high priests who would go around preaching, you know, that cul-de-sacs were evil, or, you know, and what I learned very quickly was that whatever rules a planner comes up with for what makes a great public space, I quickly learned that I can take you somewhere in the world where that rule is broken, and breaking that rule is actually what makes that space work.
Yeah, yeah.
So a good example of that is I will bang on and on and on about the importance of public seating, that being social seating, not decorative seating. But you go to Siena Town Square and there's no seats in the Siena Town Square. Everybody sits on the bricks. But it's the breaking of that rule that actually makes Siena Town Square work. So I think that was one of my earliest lessons, was look at don't judge a space by what you've been taught the rules are. Judge a space as by whether it's working or not, and then start to figure out what is it that makes this space work. And you know, I've been with some of the world leaders who I would say you know, kind of the apostles of a particular branch of planning, who'll walk into a space and go, "Oh, this is disgusting because it breaks rules A, B, and C." And I'm just like, hang on a minute, does it work or doesn't it work? You know, we've got a great example of that is we've got a nightclub in Melbourne called the Section 8 Bar. It's built in a car park. The floor is still the asphalt with the white lines painted on it. All the furniture is piles of pallets. The bar is an old shipping container. It breaks every single rule about what would make a great nightclub. Yep. But it's the breaking of the rules that gives it the vibe and makes it one of the most popular bars. So yeah, that was my big lesson. Just look and see what actually works, and then start asking. You know, so for example, when I first started going to European villages, I started to realize that the great public spaces work as rooms. And then I observed in some places that they created like an almost invisible ceiling with, you know, lights or flags or something like that. So that gave me a whole new metaphor to be able to talk about public spaces. So now when I'm teaching planning professionals, I say, you know, do you have your lounge room furniture bolted to the floor? You know, so when you start understanding it as a living room, that gives you the clues as to what makes the space work or not work.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because just to the first kind of point you made about, I guess, people having these different high priests or rules that they really hold on to. Definitely something we see just talking to all the different councils around in local governments. Yeah, I'm always interested, like, how do you think what like is the best way to kind of reconcile that between these things? You mentioned kind of looking at what's working, but I guess it must be really hard to kind of front foot and come up with the policies that enable that kind of flexibility to kind of look and listen, as you say.
Okay, so we get into some big picture issues here. And probably the biggest of them all is that when you go to a European village or town, historically, that space evolved over a long period of time and was built, you know, when those first towns were established, people could put buildings wherever the bloody hell they liked. There was no master plan that told them where to put buildings. And that's why the streets are chaotic and organic, okay? And so every person in that community had a say in the evolution of that space, but it happened incrementally over a long period of time. The problem today is we try to speed that incremental process up. We forget to take the little steps. We're looking for the big steps. We're looking, not so much, let's say, for an individual house, but as far as planning town centres, etc., we go straight into a master planning mentality, which is, what's the big picture here? Let's all agree on what the big picture is going to be. There's a fascinating book called The Social Logic of Space, which I would recommend to any planner, which explains that it's the underlying values and belief systems which determine the shape of any public space. And they analyse they start with French villas, for example. There was a master plan when people were able to say to inhabitants of a town, you can put a building wherever the bloody hell you like. There was an underlying social logic behind that says you are not just responsible for the design of the inside of this building. You are civically responsible for how you place it, because that is going to shape the evolving shape of the public realm. So the civic logic was, or the master plan was in people's heads, not something that was debated and put on a sheet of paper. Now, what I argue is that those civic responsibilities have been slowly eroded and taken over by councils, government, etc. And people no longer have that civic responsibility for the shape or the emerging shape of their community, their neighbourhood. And then that leads to standardization and sterilisation. Because no longer is the imprint of each person adding their little bit of magic to the evolving public realm. What we have is a standardization, rules, regulations, because government no longer trusts those people. The issue here is that it's a two-way street. So councils and government have slowly taken over, and the move has been away from what I call a citizen model to a customer model. So under the citizen model, we all had a whole lot of responsibilities for dealing with antisocial behaviour, problems in our neighbourhoods, the shape of our neighbourhoods, etc. Under the customer model, we say to local government and government, we're paying rates and taxes. We want you to deliver all those things we used to do for ourselves. It's what I call outsourcing your civic responsibility. And I believe that's what's causing the erosion in the quality of our community life. It has been that move. Now, what our company is interested in doing is helping particularly local government move back to a citizen model where we say, what are the things that are not your core job that the community should be doing for themselves? How do we now what I was going to say is the vicious cycle is that because over time we've been handing our civic responsibility over to government bodies, we as a community have lost the capacity to do that problem solving ourselves and implement. So you've got to break that circuit by giving particularly local government the tools that say, stop fixing this problem for the community. Give them the tools where they can fix the problem themselves. So that's what we've modelled in something like the 7-Day Makeover, where we're taking, say, 200 volunteers a day for a week and helping them transform their entire town centre. So at the end of that, they go, my God, we can actually do this. We can do it in a short time. We can do it on a shoestring budget. I think the other part of the question you've asked is understanding the nature of what I would call agile placemaking. Now, this has already been a trend in the software world, a move away from master planning to agile planning.
Yeah.
We use exactly the same methodology as agile software development is using, which is to say, and that's what happens with a 7-day makeover, is basically what's called the sprint in the software world. We're saying, what is the one thing that we can do that's going to make a difference, that might move the client closer to the destination that they want? Let's test that out. Let's do it quickly, and let's test it out. So we're huge fans of that approach to planning, which is, even if you're in a master planning exercise, is to say, how can we do this in an agile fashion? What is the experiment that we could be running in the next 2 weeks or the next 12 weeks that is going to test out whether we're on the right track or not? Now, as you would know, in the software world, what they argue is, under a master planning process, you might be betting millions of dollars on a software product. Under the agile model, you're betting 2 weeks' work or 4 weeks' work. You're not betting the whole house. So we're really, really big fans of that. And it doesn't matter how complicated the master planning process seems to be. I believe there is always a way of finding, what is the small deliverable we could be delivering. So I was the placemaker of a city here in Australia very early in my career. It was my first job as a placemaker. And my job was to revitalise the main street, which had basically died. And after 18 months, I basically got chased out of town. I completely failed. And I licked my wounds for about 6 months. And looking back, the biggest mistake I made was the amount of energy I put into master planning. It meant I was in constant consultation meetings. I was in writing reports. Now, we did do some agile placemaking there, but the balance was all wrong. I was spending, let's say, 90% on master planning, 80% on agile planning, and it should have been the other way around. So I've learned from hard experience that, one of the fatal flaws in local government is this constant, if they think a town centre has to be revitalised, first thing they do is they put money in their budget for a study, employ a consultant with that money, but they do not allocate anything for implementation. And I say that's like hiring an architect to design you a house, and when they ask you what's your budget, you just go, oh, I don't know, just bring us your best dream. And then when they engage with the community and say, what do you want for your town centre? Again, there's no constraints on people's thinking. The thing that we do with 7-day makeovers is we put constraints on people's thinking by saying, these are the resources we've actually got. We've got $60,000 to work with, and that's it. Whatever we do that's all we've got to use. Okay? That's a long rave about agile planning. And
it's actually funny topic because originally I'm a software engineer. I didn't tell you, but so agile planning is agile in general methodology is my bread and butter normally. And it's funny because so in the agile you have this part of iterating fast, of course, with also the idea of failing fast in case something doesn't work, so you can iterate and go like in a fast way on the right track. But there is also an important part of the agile is talking to customers. How would you say in the planning industry is it reflected? How do you talk to customers, and how do you integrate the final citizens and users of the public space in your reflection?
Okay, so our model moves away from community consultation, which is talk-based. And we say nothing is accomplished by just talking to people, particularly if you've got no constraints on their thinking. So unless you're sitting down with people and saying, we've got $500 to spend on your town centre, what should we spend it on? Even then, I would say, and this is the other big misnomer that, or myth, I believe, is driving a lot of policy, is we keep saying the community knows best. The community knows what it wants. Now, you would know as a software developer, you would never say the client knows perfectly what the bit of software is. My brother's in software development, and he says that there is actually an academic study that says that clients only know 20% of what they want out of the software when the process starts. They discover the other 80% in the development process. Now, I would argue that's exactly the same in planning. If you ask the community what they want, you'll get a 20% response, only 20% of what's possible. The most likely thing you'll hear is, we would like fairy lights like we saw in Canberra, or we would like this like we saw in such and such a town. And most people can only imagine something they've already seen. They can't imagine their town having a point of difference that puts them on the map. If I say to people, imagine your town is attracting 3,000 mayors a year coming to your town to do a study tour, what is it that's attracting those 3,000 mayors? They will not have the foggiest idea what that might be, you know. And you get this phenomenon that, you know, in Australia, you know, one town painted giant murals on grain silos, and now every town's painting murals on their grain silos because they think that's the secret of how you know, attract more visitors to the town centre. The problem that does is, all it does is weaken the original creator, and makes you, yes, you know, we're doing the same as everybody else.
What we usually say in software, I don't know if it's the same in planning, but you say that you should always listen to the things people are not happy about. For example, you show them your software and they say, oh, we don't like this, but you should never listen to the suggestion they do to fix it, because usually it's not the appropriate one, or at least it just, as you said, maybe 20% of what is actually possible, and maybe another alternative could serve them better than the one they're suggesting.
Absolutely, absolutely. So a big part of the way we work with communities is education. We say that unless you're showing people, you know, so for example, we start our 7-day makeovers by giving them some basic placemaking principles, but then we take them for a walk around their town centre and we point out what's working, what's not working, where the opportunities are, etc. And it's only out of that they have the capacity to start saying, you know, we want X, Y, and Z. The next step in our process is a really important one. And that is, so under a normal master planning process, you would have people generate ideas, usually without any constraints on their thinking. You would then give them 10 red dots each to go and vote for their favorite idea that somebody came up with. And then you'd write a report that would say, you know, this one scored the most red dots, etc. Now, we think that's an absolute nonsense, because it doesn't actually test where people are willing. If we're trying to activate citizens, what are people willing to do to bring their town centre to life? Not what they say they would like to bring, but what are they willing to do? So we have a very simple exercise. We help them generate the maximum number of ideas for how they're going to spend their $60,000 or whatever it happens to be. And then we say to them, if you only had 10 minutes to give to your town, which idea did you hear today would you give your 10 minutes to? And then we say, if you're so excited by that idea, you'd be prepared to be part of a leadership team to make that idea happen, come out the front, write it on a sheet of paper, and then everybody else that supports you go and stand with that person. And they're our preliminary project teams. It's not about what I, the placemaker, judge is going to make the biggest impact. It doesn't matter how good an idea is, if there is not somebody in the community willing to drive it and make it happen, it's a dead idea. Or, you know, an idea that could sit on the shelf.
It also brings, I think, an interesting reflection about generally like the role of the expert, because like, should the expert that is supposedly the most knowledgeable person to realize a task be trusted and take all the decision on its own, and just act first to see how people will react because probably he has more information to do the accurate thing, or should he rely on the group of non-expert people suggesting stuff? And I think this can apply in all the domains of life, in politics, in the companies or whatever. But I think in planning it's especially true because due to the long processes and the high spheres of decision, etc. Do you think that sometimes it's lacking, this dialogue and balance to be found between expert and the real people that live in the neighborhoods?
Yes, I think that okay. I guess this takes us back to the overview that we were talking about. I absolutely believe that giving people information and insight. So I talk about it this way. If I go to the doctor and say, Doc, I'm not feeling well, he's going to ask me a whole lot of questions about the symptoms that I'm experiencing. And then he's going to make some kind of a diagnosis. He's not going to start the conversation by saying, what pill do you think you should be taking to make you feel better? Yeah. But that's how we're working with communities. The neighborhood is sick, the town center is sick. And we sit the people down and go, okay, what's the pill that's going to fix this? And I call myself a doctor of public spaces. It's taken me 30-something years of studying public spaces to be able, I can walk into a town center and within 15 minutes, I can tell you what's working, what's not working, why it's not working, etc. But that comes out of that extensive experience, and I cannot expect Joe Bloggs to have that information or insight. So that's one part of the equation. I think it's the role of the expert to do that educating, which is why I say, we take them for a walk around their town centre, show them what's working, what's not. I think the other role of the expert is then to create the freedom or the space in which those people can start to explore what ideas are going to address that. So so for example, the way we structure in a 7-day makeover, we do not get people to start talking about ideas they've got in the big group. We put everybody into small groups of no more than about 6 people. And then we say, okay, you've got a budget of 60,000. Somebody's willing to donate a sailboat. Down the depot, there's logs and rocks and mulch, etc. So these are all the resources. What's the most creative thing you can do with those resources to transform your town centre? And we give them plasticine and stuff to play with so that it's very tactile as opposed to just an intellectual exercise. So the reason we don't do it in the big group is because you just get groupthink. The first person who says, we need more parking, that'll solve the problem, then everybody's off on that tangent. So we want to generate. And then what I do is I get each group to present their plan and to do it in a creative way as possible. And then I'm asking the group questions like, which of these ideas excited you the most? Has anybody got an idea that would enhance what this group has suggested? And we just get this hothouse going of people just throwing up ideas. Now, I think that most people are incredibly creative if they're given the right framework, the right playing field to play within. So that's an important part of the process. And then we go on to that next step, which is which of these ideas you've heard, fires you up and you'd want to give 10 minutes to. So for me, that's it, in my case, the role of the expert. The other role that I play is to go, okay, I understand why local government is as dysfunctional as it is. I understand the structural issues around that. I understand why master planning takes years, produces a report that goes nowhere. So my job as an expert is to start to invent processes that circumvent that. So if you like, just the way that the whole agile movement transformed the way software is developed, we need the same kind of revolution within local government. What are the actual tools? What are the actual processes? So to give you a simple example, so we work with what we call permission statements rather than regulations. So we say to a council, if you're going to work with businesses in your town centre to revitalise your town centre, the businesses can't do that under a regulatory regime because they can't navigate the complexity of those regulations. So the first town we ever worked in with permission statements, my challenge to them was boil your regulations from no, you can't do it because, down into statements, yes, you can do it if. And it's a significant mind shift that you are not saying to people, these are the reasons you can't do it. You're saying, well, you can do anything you like, but there are a few conditions on that. So a simple example of that is one of the permission statements we use in almost everything we do is, if it's movable, it's allowable. Because we say, why do we need a building permit for something that's movable? Right? Because if you don't like where it is, council, you can move it somewhere else. Now, can you see that opens up a whole new field of play? Because now we can go, we think we'd like a stage here, but instead of building a permanent stage, we build one that can be moved. And that means if it doesn't work there, it can be moved somewhere else. So permission statements simply open up a much more flexible and the ability to act agile as opposed to a regulatory approach.
I guess it kind of reduces like the potential consequence if you bolt something to the ground in the wrong place. It's a much harder thing to fix, which is I guess it's one of the benefits of software is that it's all intangible in the kind of virtual space. So it's so easy to fix things if they're wrong. Whereas in the physical kind of environment, you need to introduce things like that. So it's easier to recover from placing something in the wrong place or a bad idea or something like that.
The other thing that really helps move to this more agile approach, and it's intrinsic to the agile approach, is that you treat everything as a trial. So we say to councils, whether you like it or not, everything you are doing is actually a trial. If you spend $10 million renovating the town centre, it's a trial. There's no guarantee it's going to work.
Yeah.
In fact, you know, the very first 7-day makeover we ever did was in a town that had spent $4 million renovating their main street, and it was worse at the end of it than at the start of it, and we had to come in and fix it up with $5,000. You know, so if you can move people to understand that everything they are doing is a trial, then the agile approach simply breaks the size of the trials that you're doing down and reduces the risk of each of those trials. So yeah, you know, so for example, our use of permission statements, we say to councils, don't try and introduce them as a blanket thing across your entire city. You pick one shopping centre or main street, you apply it there, you test it out. And what that does is it reduces a lot of the trying to create a final problem-proof solution at the end. Because if you're going to roll it out across the whole city, then you're going to be locked in discussion for the next 2 years. Have we got the wording of this right? You know. Whereas I say, don't worry about that. You know, like we'll give you a draft. Just test that out and find out what works and what doesn't work in the trial. So it gets momentum going as opposed to just being paralyzed by we've got to get this exactly right.
Yeah, and it's exactly, yeah, it's a lot of parallels to software, because if you do kind of put too much pressure on a decision to be right, you have to try and foresee what everyone might say about something and what their needs might be or what their requirements might be. And it really is like an impossible task unless it's something you've done before and seen the results, and the situation's exactly the same.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like redefining the success criteria from making a plan, executing the project, and hitting the budget, away from just like doing what you said you were going to do, to actually shifting it to what outcomes do we want out of this project, and then kind of iterating towards like starting somewhere small, like a small step towards that outcome, getting the feedback, and then maybe doubling down on some things that are working and putting money into those things, and cutting out some other areas, and something like that.
Yeah, so we would argue that there should be two underlying drivers, particularly at the local government level, that starts to change the culture of the way the organisation works. And the first one is around place or placemaking, a sense of place, a sense of belonging, emotional connection, vitality of neighbourhood life. And the second should be around moving from the customer model back to a citizen model, because the customer model is sending our councils broke. And it's also a key driver of why people don't feel connected to their community. If you're just a customer waiting to get good quality of life delivered to you, then you're not actually contributing. And I would argue that's an impossible task that the local government has taken on. We're about to trial an experiment in a council in WA, which is about moving the entire organisation to be looking at every decision they make through those two prisms. And the way we're planning on doing that is that we're going to divide them into all staff will be in 4 teams. They'll all get training in placemaking and citizen making. But then each of them will be allocated a public space. They'll get a budget, and in 4 hours, they've got to transform that public space. And then we will run a campaign about, is this decision I'm about to make basically going to create a stronger sense of place? Part of the issue within local government is that so I would argue that the more specialised a society becomes, the more idiotic it becomes. And the reason for that is, if you think about it, so rationality or being rational is about, am I acting consistent with my belief systems? Now, the more you break knowledge down into silos, the more chances there are that information in a silo over here makes what I'm believing in my silo seem completely and utterly ridiculous or illogical, right? Mumford in the 60s argued that a specialised society needs to have generalists, that is, people whose knowledge spans all of the silos that can bring that information together. And I think that's the problem that we have in local government is, I've had people whose job in local government is to look at contractors' insurance. Now, guess what happens? I'm about to sign a contract with that local government, and this person contacts me and says, I want to see your certificates of currency for your insurance. I send them the certificates for insurance. Say, that's not enough. I need to see the policy documents. I send them the policy documents, and they go, "This is the wrong. You've got the wrong cover." Yeah. Now, when they go home at night, their entire satisfaction is based on, "Wow, I found a flaw in David's insurance policy." So. This is, the more you drill down, the more illogical the whole system becomes. And I would say, and it's probably true at all levels of government, but in particularly at local government, That splitting of responsibility means that nobody's really responsible for the sense of place or how people are relating to citizens.
And you know something that also came up. You were talking before about agile methodology getting applied in planning. Well, it's true that software is the simplest to apply the agile methodology because you can iterate very fast on small stuff, and it costs almost no money. While building is the opposite. But it's funny that you say that planning industry in general is getting into agile because in software, like agile was probably became major maybe 10 years ago, and now some companies are trying to question it because they feel that it lacks a bit of resilience. For example, they say that the fact that you iterate very fast and that you pivot also very fast sometimes is struggling to install like a real trend line amongst the team and a real coherence about the work of everyone, and sometimes lacking to see maybe a long-term result. Do you think it's a problem that can happen in planning?
So I've written an ebook about this in which I basically say every project is a mix of master planning and agile planning. So even in a 7-day makeover, the first 2 days you could argue is a master planning process where we're going, let's look at the weaknesses of the town centre, let's look at the opportunities, let's generate ideas, let's create project teams. That essentially is a master planning kind of process. Now, we recently made over an aged care facility where we could not have the same degree of agility in the way that we ran that process because we couldn't get the elderly people out in their walking frames. You know what I'm saying? So I say, for example, constructing a railway line requires much higher levels of master planning than what we're doing, say, in a 7-day makeover. So you can't go out and put one sleeper down and go, you know, where do you think we should put the next one? Oh, okay, where do we put the next one?
Yeah.
But in planning a railway line, the challenge would be how do we incorporate agility into that planning process, which might be, look, if we're going to put it here, how do we run a trial to see how that will disrupt community life in that space or add to community life? You know, so I think there is a much more nuanced conversation that we have to have, but in that it's not an either or, it is very much project dependent and saying how do we maximize the agile element of this particular project as opposed to otherwise where I become one of those high priests I was talking about earlier and saying unless it's completely agile, it's a load of shit, you know.
It's always a loop.
Yeah.
No, but I think, well, it's we could talk for hours, and as I told you, I've been tricked in looking at the content you did and then another, and then in the end, like, there are so many topics that are interested that we could talk about. Unfortunately, I don't think we will have all the time today. Maybe we can do a second episode about another theme. But I had two questions that I really wanted to ask you. The first one came up just before is you said during 30 years you traveled all around the world to see like city centers and generally like public places. What was maybe, or what were some of them that really impacted you, or the one you preferred, and why was that?
So I think definitely like Italian hill towns, villages in the south of France, old Barcelona, a lot of those, the Netherlands, for different reasons. Certainly with, let's take, you know, Italian hill towns, French villas, I guess that really taught me about how public spaces are really the outdoor living room of the entire community. And, you know, what are the elements that make it such? Those, for that reason, I had the huge privilege of working with Hans Monderman in the Netherlands. He was the creator of Shared Space, or Naked Streets, whatever you want to call it, where he was taking all of the traffic artifacts out of public spaces. And you know, the interesting part of that story is that some years earlier, I'd made a discovery, which was that the speed of traffic on residential streets was governed by the degree to which the residents have psychologically retreated from their street. And we ran experiments all around the world of going into neighbourhoods with traffic problems. And in 2 hours, we could get the speed of that traffic down to, you know, to the point where kids could do chalk drawings in the street quite safely. And he made exactly the same discovery accidentally, where he was a traffic engineer, and in Holland they have to rebuild their streets every 5 or 10 years because of subsidence. Back in the early days, you know, the Netherlands pioneered living streets and the living yards and all of that stuff. But his political masters told him he couldn't do that anymore. And so he decided the only thing he could do was to rebuild this street as a traditional village street, which meant no white lines and speed humps and all of the traffic artifacts that we would normally put in. And to his astonishment, they found the speed of the traffic had dropped by 50%. And so that was the genesis of the whole shared space movement in Europe. And I was privileged to be invited to go and evaluate those projects and work with Hans. So, yeah, that was another little interesting chapter in my life. But it points to a really important point. I guess what fascinates me is the psychology of public space. And the problem with most designers is they have what I would call a design-centric view of the world. That is, they think that you fix everything and make great spaces if you've got great design. And I often tell the story of in the 70s, I had these really poor friends who lived in this rundown house with broken windows. All the furniture had been scavenged from, you know, tips and stuff. But that house was constantly full of laughter and conversation. You would never find a more homely space than that. And the major problem we have in planning at the moment is that we're building display houses rather than homes. In other words, if you take a design-centric view of the world, you end up with a display house that has no soul, and it doesn't really matter. When I go into a town centre, I say to them, my job is not to come in and demolish your house and rebuild you a new house, which is kind of like the traditional design-centric approach. In fact, the worse a town centre is, the happier I am, because I know that I can transform that space on a shoestring budget. And that's my creative challenge, right? If I go into a space and it's already been, new paving put in and fantastic seats out of some catalogue have been put in, and it's got great sculptures, etc. I go, where can I take this? You know, how do I convert a design house into a home? Is a much harder job than to take something that's totally run down and derelict and turn that into a home. is what design does is it gets you focused on the wrong thing. And that's why I was saying to me, the whole business of planning and urban design is a psychological task. It's not a design task.
I noted this sentence from you that I felt was representing you pretty well. At least the ideas I heard from you. You said I'm a professional placemaker, which means that what I try to do is try to give people back the sense of home in the public realm that they have lost over time.
Yeah.
Do you still
Yeah.
live by that sentence?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Nice.
And that so I to explain that, I say if you go back in time, and particularly if you do go to Europe to, you know, say a French villa or whatever, people's sense of home and belonging is not centered just in the four walls of their house. It flows out of their front door, out into the street in front of their house, down to the corner store, down to the center of town. And in our modern towns, what has been happening is that sense of home and place has been slowly shrinking over time for a whole range of social reasons, etc. So for me, what placemaking is how do we reestablish that sense of home and ownership that that extends out into people's space. Now, when you understand that, then the parallels between homemaking and placemaking are incredibly powerful. So, for example, I have shown people. If I take them for a walk around their town centre and we're saying what works, what doesn't work, and we look at, let's say, your typical park bench on the main street of a town, how inviting is that seat for you to sit in? Does that make you feel at home? And people will go, no. And I go, so what could we do to that seat without changing anything else? What could we do to that seat to make you and other people feel more at home? And somebody will suddenly go, oh, if we put cushions on it. And we've done that. You put cushions on that seat and suddenly it's magically transformed into something which is much more homely. So it's not just an analogy. It actually gives you a framework to think about those spaces. So I know I've probably rabbited on long enough, but one of the interesting things about people's homes is rarely do people fix the furniture in their home. And there's a couple of powerful reasons for that. And one of them is psychological. The psychological reason is we get bored really, really easily. Now, the ironic thing I find is that when councils bolt everything down or concrete it in, everybody loves it for the first 12 months. But it's the same as the furniture in your house. Very quickly, you start to get bored. And the community then goes, oh, let's do another makeover. Let's spend another $1 million moving all this stuff, and then we'll get bored. Whereas if you actually treated it as a home and made all of the furniture movable, all of the artwork movable, etc., it costs you virtually nothing every time you get bored to rearrange the space. So I think it creates a whole different kind of mentality of if you think of it as a living room as opposed to a space that a designer has to decide, what the shape of that space is.
And yeah, perfect transition to the next question, and probably the last one I will be asking you is so right now, do you have any news or venture you're working on right now that you would like to share?
Yes. So we are as a company. We are starting to move towards, I'd say pretty similar to you guys, is that we want to create tools that help councils, business associations, bids to regenerate their town centre themselves by us giving them a program that they can follow. So all of the educational materials, etc. So that's what we're working on at the moment. The first one we're working on is around revitalising the town centres, teaching businesses how they can revitalise their town centre themselves without council spending a single cent on revitalising the town centre. So it's about empowerment, giving them the knowledge. One of the others that we're also going to be working on is how people can reclaim the street that they live on from traffic and bring it back as primary social space.
Okay,
and we've got a few others in the pipeline as well.
And where can people follow your work and connect with you in case they want to speak with you or look at what you do?
Well, that's the other big thing we're going to work on is we're going to rejig our website coincide with our new focus. But it's creativecommunities.com.
Okay. We're going to put all the links when we will publish the podcast. We'll put all of your links in the description, of course.
Yep. It's not a problem.
Perfect. And for the word of the end, anything you want to add?
Oh man, I've talked so much.
And you were here for that, so really happy that you did.
You know, I used to run 3-day training workshops for planning professionals. So, you know, don't get me started, or you might get three days worth. You know,
means that maybe there will be a next day, which we will be really excited to. And next time we'll try on a different angle, and probably everything ends up concentrated in the same philosophy, but it has a lot of different branches that are all of them are really exciting.
So one thing we could explore next time, which is another passion of mine that we haven't talked about, is some years ago a Scottish politician asked me what was the secret of my creativity. And I've done 20 years research on creativity, and I've written a whole book about how to think outside the box, basically. So that's maybe a productive area for us to talk about at some point.
It is.
I have a whole new theory on creativity. I argue that everybody's born a creative genius, and we gradually lose it the older we get. So my book is all about how can I help you get back what you were born with. Our human brains are a massive creativity machine, and anybody can tap into it. So there you go. That's a teaser for the next one.
And don't get me started, because also I think that there are interesting parallels to do with like the planning industry, because in the end, planners needs to be creative, but at the same time they're serving an industry that needs to is an industry, so it needs to be to stay operational and go fast. So this balance between efficiency and creativity is really, there is a sweet spot to be found, and I think it's an interesting subject for the next one. Anyway,
absolutely.
Great. Thanks, David, for coming over. It was very nice. We're really happy to have you. Maybe Foss, you want to say something else for the end?
No, I just found the conversation very interesting. So thank you very much for coming along and sharing that with us.
Not a problem.
It was, and can't wait for the next one. Thank you, David.
Yeah, not a problem.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Bye.
All the best.
Yeah, you
Thanks.
too. Bye.
Bye.